just going back to Jesus' teaching,
Mm-hmm.
it has to begin in the heart. You
Yeah.
have to actually be curious.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't. This cannot. This whole.
You can't fake that.
You can't fake. It's like some movie. Somebody said, this whole telling the truth scam is pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's right.
So you can't deploy it as a rhetorical tool.
Yes.
You have to actually be curious.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fireside Chat, a production of Allen Creek Community Church, or AC3 as we like to call ourselves. In today's discussion, we want to dive deeply into a topic of concern for disciples of Jesus or for those who are investigating faith in Christ, so we can chart a path of faithfulness in a world of uncertainty. To that end, we hope this conversation sparks your interest and your learning. If you want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe, and we look forward to reading your comments below and getting your take. Now, let's begin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to AC3's Fireside Chat.
Ta-da!
So this is our podcast where we dive a little bit deeper into some of the issues that are relevant for people following Jesus in our particular context. And today we just want to kind of unpack a big idea, and it's summarized in a question about questions. And it is, when is a question better than an answer? But first, Dan, a nod to our little environment here. We are the Fireside Chat.
It is, isn't it spectacular?
It looks...
And it's clearly a real fire.
Yeah, very, very authentic looking fire. So, if you're trying to engage your neighbor and you're a follower of Jesus today about anything that relates to the culture, you are probably ready for this to be a fight.
Yeah.
Or there to be bad words thrown around, or at least bad feelings. And why is that? Describe, I guess, a little bit about what have we come to in our particular moment where it's fraught.
Yeah, I mean the church, Christianity in particular, has come under fire in the culture. I would say in the last. Well, it's been steadily building for decades, but it has really accelerated with the rise of social media. I think has been a big thing. I think the global pandemic created division around lots of issues, but faith being one of them. I think presidential politics in the United States contributed to a lot of it, and it created a lot of divisiveness.
Yeah.
So where there were kind of polite, that's your thing, it's not my cup of tea, it's been amplified into, you're now my enemy.
Right. You're not just wrong on an issue potentially, you are a bad person.
Yeah, it's become moral, it's become ethical.
Yeah.
It's become super divisive. Some of it church people have brought on themselves with bad behavior.
Yeah.
Some of it not with bad behavior, but just, not everyone has to have a hot take on every subject all the time.
Right.
You can shut up.
Right,
That's
exactly.
an option.
Yeah.
And that very same thing goes for non-Christians. So it's a co-created thing for sure. Yeah. It's if you're gonna take a Christian worldview and brand it as such, you're opening yourself up to take some shots for sure.
Yeah. And some of the tension, like you said, okay, some of it's created by, some of it is problematic because it's, people have set themselves up in a negative way by their attitude or whatever. But some of it is inherent in the fact that we truly have a clash, right? We are having a worldview clash.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas it used to be that we were taught, we would say, we might even have a common moral center here, even if we disagree on how things should play out in the public sphere and the political arena. Even some of our really big religious handholds could hold in common with our neighbor.
Yeah, but way of example, I saw a thing on the web just yesterday, and it's somebody's TikTok or whatever. I can't remember how it came across my screen, but it's clearly somebody has a TikTok channel sort of a thing or whatever, and it's called Our Poly Life. And and it's all about promoting their polyamorous,
Mm.
and they do it apparently. I didn't even have the sound on. I just saw the title,
Yeah.
and then it wasn't pornography,
Yeah.
but it was I could see that it was these people exchanging dialogue going on, and I just realized that I don't have a common ground. It's this is not controversial from my point of view, in that as a Christ follower, I see a monogamous, heterosexual, covenant, lifelong bond as the only legitimate sexual option
Hmm.
for a Christian. That does not mean that I don't want gay people or polyamorous people or any to. It doesn't mean I don't want them to have a home or a job or life insurance or any of that stuff. It's just I don't agree with your choices.
Right.
And 50 years ago, it wouldn't be a discussion.
Right. No, it
It
wouldn't have
wouldn't be an
been.
issue. And something like that kind of being out in public would be this huge.
Yeah.
What is this? This is right. And
And uncontroversially so.
right. No one would really debate. And it's not that there weren't polyamorous people.
No,
I mean,
exactly.
they always have been.
Yeah.
It just, there was a point recently in our lifetimes
Yeah.
when these Christian values would have been at the center. And now holding to that, a traditional marriage view, sets me up to be a hater.
Yeah. Yeah. A bigot. And we
Yeah.
come into just a total minefield. So it's at this point, I think this was really helpful to kind of underline as we were reviewing a new book out by uh, by Greg Kugel, and it's called Street Smarts, and he talks about questions. And one of the leading ideas here is that both Socrates and Jesus, you think about these guys, obviously, as followers of Jesus, we see him as the incarnate Son. But at the level of just being great teachers, these two guys, both in the same camp of being sort of the quintessential uh, uh, classic communicator in the history of the human race to talk about big ideas. And both of them used what has become the Socratic method, but Jesus was an expert at it as well, which is the idea of asking questions. That questions were a way of leading someone toward the truth. Now, just from your, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, Dan, just from your knowledge of the scripture, name some questions that Jesus asked people. Think about how many times he asked people. He started questions, interrupted questions, or conversations rather, with questions.
Probably the central one,
Yeah.
for me, that comes to mind is, who do you say I am?
That's a good one. What do you want me to do for
What do you
you?
want me to do for you?
Yeah.
And this is you can tell that these come from the Socratic
Yeah.
framework, because he just healed somebody.
Yeah.
He just healed a blind man, and then somebody else, excuse me, Jesus,
Yeah.
and what do you want me to do for you? Like, well, duh, I'm here to be
Yeah,
healed, right?
right.
Right.
There's
No, no,
something
no.
else going on.
No, what do you want me to do
Yeah.
for you? And I think the question, who do you say I am? I think that really, that reading Peter, we see Peter at his, what do we want to say? Spontaneous best,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
which is he just blurts
His
it out.
impetuous best.
Yes, impetuous. It just when you see the strength of who Peter is, it's just
Yeah.
he just jumps in there, and it's. I mean, it
He
it
gets
is.
it.
It's referred to as the Petrine text, right?
Mhm.
It's upon this that the Roman Catholic Church
Yeah.
actually founds their structure.
Yeah.
Is the fact that this dude said,
Yeah.
"You are the Son
Christ,
of God.
the
You are
Son
the
of living
Christ."
God, yes.
And we see other examples of Peter being impetuous and not so
Yeah. Not so
admirable
awesome.
ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so out of that questioning, you get something like the
Just
Petrine
something
test.
incredible.
Petrine text.
Yep. Equally so, this coin, whose image is on it?
Yeah.
And if, there's some
Yeah.
people that think that might be the seminal text in Western civilization because it launches the idea of the separation of church and state.
good.
And when it comes to, just some of the things some of the great things that changed, that comes out of this idea that I have different obligations to Caesar than I do to God.
You're right.
They're overlapping magisteria, but they are clearly separated. And I mean, wow, there was an unheard of concept pulled out by a question.
Yeah.
Whose image is on this coin?
Yeah.
So super, super helpful. So in this book, I just found it was a great way for followers of Jesus to think about dialogue when we dialogue with our neighbors,
Mhm.
with our family members, and people who are spiritual but not religious, and some
And people who may be hostile.
and people who may be hostile. And so we have these interactions on social media, and that's where it's really fraught
Mhm.
because you can't, determine tone and all that kind of stuff. So this is a way, just if you think about how Jesus used questions to just grab that as an idea and just say, my best friend in these conversations is our questions. My best
Mm.
friends are questions. I'm getting my
Ally.
pronouns all wrong here, Dan. My best friend is questions.
My
And
my greatest allies
yes, are
are
questions.
questions.
So think about what a question does, right? Like,
Yeah.
talk about that for a little bit. What does a question do when you sit down with someone that you don't even know, but you suspect they probably are on a different worldview plane than you are? What does a question do, or a series of questions do?
Well, I think probably the most obvious thing is that it illustrates curiosity,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And curiosity is an act of hospitality,
that's good. That's really
right?
good.
So I think you are extended by asking someone, "Tell me what you think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Explain this to me." Um, it's non-aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
It's a welcoming.
Just throws out a welcome mat.
It's a hospitable thing. Well, it can be. I think I know people who maybe you do too, who I've actually confronted. People who use it as a sales technique or as
Oh yeah.
it's I suppose technically Socratic, but they use it as a way to tell me. So what do you think about this? And they're working it to trap you,
Yes.
right?
Right.
So the motive has to be
That might
pure.
be and I'm not smart enough to remember the name for that, but there's something that's a lawyer's method.
Yeah. It's a lawyer trick,
It's a
right?
lawyer method, and
Yeah.
I think it has a name, and
It,
put it in the comments
yeah,
if you
yeah.
remember
Somebody
what the
tell us
name
what
is.
that is.
Where I'm leading the witness, that's what they call it, leading the witness down the little bunny trail,
Sure.
and they're pinching themselves in every
Like,
time they answer a
y-
question to like, "God, I
yeah,
gotcha."
have you stopped beating your
Yeah,
wife? That
there's a question.
right. That's a
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Are you being curious?
So
No.
not always as hospitable,
Right.
like you said.
So I think we've got to maybe begin with that in order for a question to have the most positive impact. And this is going back to Jesus' teaching.
Mhm.
It has to begin in the heart. You
Yeah.
have to actually be curious.
Yeah, yeah. There
You
you go.
can't. This cannot. This whole
You can't
like
fake that.
you can't be. It's like some movie somebody said, this whole telling the truth scam is pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's right.
So you can't
Yeah.
deploy it as a rhetorical tool.
Yes.
You have to actually be curious.
Yes.
But I think the first thing it does, it creates a hospitable space.
Yeah. And nevertheless, I totally agree with what you're saying. But as we're describing this for AC3ers and anybody who's listening in, as a technique, I think sometimes is helpful just to think, oh, wait a minute, I too often get immediately defensive.
Yes.
And the first thing I want to do is to defend with articulation of my position.
Right.
And so it's sometimes helpful just to think, because I do have the heart to connect, and I do have the heart to share my faith in ways that might be receptive, or someone might be receptive to, but I just find myself and maybe often on social media constantly drawn into an immediate battle right out of the gate. So
Yeah.
this idea that, oh, wait a minute, pause, time out. My heart is actually to get to know you.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so that being your heart, here, use questions. Questions can be your best friend in this situation. So,
Absolutely. And I
yeah.
think the earnest Christ follower, there's two things that we can found that on and feel safe in doing so. Number one, we're commanded to love our enemies. So the worst case scenario is you're sitting across from,
No,
or you're at the keyboard with somebody who you should consider an enemy. That would be the shrewd and proper view. Well, love them. And here's the thing. It's not about just acting. You actually have to love them.
Yeah.
And if you love someone, don't you want to know them?
Right.
So ask questions. I think that's absolutely critical. And I've honestly forgotten the second one.
Yeah.
There were two things, but I think that's key, is to actually love. Oh, the other one is we should be the most curious people in the world. We
Yes.
should be the most open-minded.
Yeah.
We should be, wow, oh,
Yeah.
you believe what?
Yep.
That's fascinating. Explain that to me.
Yeah.
Because that is just simply information that we take in
Yeah.
that is going to do one of two things. It's either going to help us eliminate erroneous junk we might have in our own
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and we
Yeah.
go, oh, I never thought about that. That's good. We add it.
Mm-hmm.
Or we go, boy, that confirms that is absolute baloney.
Yeah.
And I was pretty sure it was
Yeah.
baloney, and now I've got more evidence. I got
Yeah.
another data
I
point.
don't have all the answers, but that sure isn't it. Yeah.
That isn't it. So more information is never going to hurt us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ever.
Exactly. And anyone who claims to love the one who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," cannot or should not be threatened by the pursuit of truth.
Yes,
And sometimes that
absolutely.
can get us into ditches, so we beware. But that the baseline is curiousness, because I follow the one who is all truth.
Yes.
So to be curious means to know more about God, because
Yeah.
it means I will find something out I might not have known about Him before.
Absolutely.
Because it all belongs to Him.
Yeah. It can be scary, but
Yeah.
it's good.
So Greg lists out a few specific ones to that can open these conversations up. And the first is, what do you mean by that? Which
do
I
you
thought it was
mean?
really, really great, because sometimes someone says something and then we immediately go into defense mode based on an understanding of what we thought they meant, but that might not be what they meant at all. So it immediately asks for clarification. And like you said, and again, your heart being in the right place, I really want to know what you meant by that, because I don't want to misunderstand you. Because if I do, I'm probably going to straw man you. I'm going to straw man your position. What does straw manning mean? Just so we clarify what that means.
It means that you create essentially a fake argument on behalf of your opponent.
Yeah.
That's easily
There you
defeated.
go. And so to avoid straw manning the argument of my opponent, I asked this question.
Yeah.
And there might be some interesting clarifications that they make as they answer the question too. What do I mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have the privilege of writing a piece for the Everett Herald about once a month, and very rarely I get mail back. Somebody, I've received a couple of nasty grams over the last year or so, and I got one. It wasn't particularly nasty, but it was angry and pushing back, and there were several points where this individual should have asked, "What did you mean by that?" When based on things I had said, and instead made presumptions, and in some cases straw men, and imposed on me views that I don't have based on what they interpreted I said. Whereas if they said, "What did you mean by that?" we could have real dialogue. But as it is,
yes,
there's nowhere to go. They've already made up their
Yeah.
mind about what I think, and they've misinterpreted it.
Right. There's a sense in which often we're using the same vocabulary, but with different dictionaries.
Ooh, that's good. Is that yours? Is that
Nope, it's
original?
Greg's. Thank you, Greg Kuchel.
That's way to go.
Yeah.
You could have totally stolen that.
So isn't that something, right? So we say, well, we all want to love our neighbor. Love. Everyone agrees. We should
Great.
all love.
That's a great
Okay.
example.
Well, what define love?
Yeah, that's a great. Right, there's a motto getting tossed around now in I think the LGBTQ. I think it's
Yeah.
largely centered there. Love is love.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think the point is that if you love someone, it doesn't really matter their gender,
Their
anything. That sort of a thing. But that's the thing.
Well, we use the same vocabulary. We all value love. But wait a minute, how are you defining this?
What do you mean by love? Tell me what
Yeah.
you mean by love. Because I'm pretty sure not a single one of those people thinks that by love is love, meaning a 40-year-old man loving a 9-year-old girl
Yeah.
and having a sexual relationship with her is good.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody means that.
No.
I don't think anybody
Exactly.
means that. So,
But the association that has been around for a very long time is called NAMBLA.
Yeah. There are
which
people
is
who might mean that.
the word love is in the acronym,
Yes.
the Man Boy Love Association.
Right.
So there's a definition of love there that's completely different.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
it's
So
it's
what do you
worth
mean by that
what do you mean
is
by love?
worth exploring.
Yeah, and what do you mean by love is love?
Yes.
And I've had one conversation precisely about that. It's like, well, I think love is unconditional. And I said, okay. And I remember saying, I think love is conditional.
Yeah.
For example,
Yeah.
I don't think that's love.
Right.
I think it's conditioned on consent, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. And just asking the question begins to start the wheels spinning. Love is love. Wait a minute. Yeah, no, like if I go to the office and I see my secretary in a tight sweater and like I'm feeling well lust, but now I love her. But is that okay?
Yeah.
Like is that no, suddenly there are parameters
There are,
around
yeah,
love.
love is not love. And
Love.
maybe, and to be fair, like let's pick on the idea of uh, a um, a propaganda, right? So Christians can throw around love the sin, but love the sinner, hate the sin.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I love to have that question. What do you mean by
Yeah.
that? Because that gets
There you
tossed
go.
around a lot.
There you
You
go.
know, what does it
Yeah.
mean to hate the sin? What
Mhm.
exactly are you hating?
Mhm.
And 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 again, maybe what does love mean
Right.
to you?
Right.
These are things that get uh, tossed around maybe with too much, with not a lot of precision.
Yeah.
And that follow up question can be really helpful.
So here's another question. How do you know that's true?
Mm.
So what is this? This is a question about going beyond assertions,
Right?
right? We make assertions.
An assertion is just something that you
You
say.
you slay and you claim is true.
Yeah.
So well, okay, I got it. How do you know that's true? And that's a very it's probably careful how that question is posed because that can sound very offensively. They sound offensive. Not offensive as in I'm offended, but on the offensive.
Right. Yes.
Uh,
I'm attacking
I'm
you.
attacking you by saying, "How do you know that's true?" But no, it's like, well, what? How do you know that's true? You develop your opinions from somewhere,
Right.
and then what this reveals is your true sources, your authority sources, where you get information
Yeah.
from, and then that sometimes reveals where the divide is. Oh, it's like, well, see, I don't accept that as a true source,
Right.
and that might come the other way, where your non-Christian neighbor is saying, "How do you know that's true?" So, well, Jesus said it. And they say, "Well, I don't accept Jesus as a true
Yeah.
source."
Yeah. It's
So,
like
you know,
the idea of Jesus is great, but that Bible thing that you believe in,
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
see that as a reliable
But then,
document.
but in a beautiful way, that question might open up the whole conversation about why
Why
would
don't?
you trust this document to give you accurate information about what Jesus said?
Yeah.
Or they might say, "Well, I like Jesus too, but I don't believe what he said over here." It's like,
Yeah.
how do you know what
Then
Jesus said?
then what? Yeah.
What is your opinion of
What is it? How do you parse
how do you
Jesus'
arbitrate what
words?
Jesus' words are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Well,
criteria
I
do you
think
use?
he said the Sermon on the Mount, but he didn't say, uh, you know, one man, one woman for life.
Or, a popular one is, the red letter Christian.
Yes.
It's like, well, I take everything Jesus said, but anything Paul said, or James, or, any of the other New Testament authors.
How do you know that? Yeah,
Yeah.
or why would you think that? And they say, well, because Jesus is the pristine, and say, or do you have any idea how the Bible's put together? That all the letters of Paul are older,
Yeah.
older, and
Older.
therefore closer to the events
Yeah.
than anything written in red letters.
Yeah. 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 And it's just question after question
Yeah.
after question,
But
right?
then,
It's how
but
do you
then
know
that
that?
can be a friendly sort of information. Like, so,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't know that.
Did you know that?
Did you
Yeah.
know that? Maybe you didn't know that.
It comes to what comes to mind too, and this is, I think, largely, if I'm not mistaken, kind of comes out of the COVID thing. It's like I did my own research, right? I
Yeah,
think that became a popular kind of ism around
yeah,
the vaccines, right? Well, I did my research.
yeah,
Okay, show me
yeah,
your,
yeah. Show me your work, kind of
oh, it was
thing.
Facebook.
Cite your sources. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Tell me why you think Facebook is reliable,
right.
place for virology,
Yeah,
or theological study, or these sorts of
right.
things.
Sometimes assertions are thrown around because they become cultural tropes. Like the church always stands in the way of science. So how do you know that? And then often it'll be, well, Galileo. It's like,
I mean,
and then that can be a great
yeah,
conversation of, well, tell me what do you know about the Galileo incident? And then, and not to be a knowledge flaunter, but it is true. If we're all in the pursuit of knowledge, it would be great to sometimes clarify where we've got a story totally wrong because we've accepted a cultural um, version of the story,
yeah.
like we've accepted certain, cultural mythological adaptations of the George Washington or whatever that aren't really true. Well, wouldn't we want to know if we've got an actual historical figure, but ahistorical or non-historical additions that I added on to my?
Yeah, George Washington never told a lie. I couldn't tell a lie.
Because it says right here in
Did he cut down a cherry tree and no?
and he threw something over the Potomac.
Yeah, he threw a coin, I think. Yeah.
Yes. You need to know
No,
that. You need to help me because I'm the Canadian over here.
that's right. He threw it across the Clinket River or whatever.
Is it the Clinton? What is it?
I
Yes,
don't
right.
know. The Ottawa River.
Right.
But yeah, these sorts of things that we've kind of uncritically adopted, and again, this kind of goes back to our idea of being curious. We
Mhm.
may hear something we didn't know. It's like we may say, "Well, of course Jesus said this. Cleanliness is next to godliness."
How do you?
Where did you read that?
Yeah, where did you read
Was
that?
that in your Bible? Because
Yeah.
it's not in mine.
Yeah.
And we've got to be humble and
Yeah.
open to maybe having some of our little tropes
Yep.
challenged too.
Absolutely.
So how did you learn that?
Yeah, exactly. Another one asked me just recently. They were just talking about the separation of church and state, and I think they imagined it from a very simplistic and again from a currently kind of Christian hostile perspective, which is that whenever the state and the church, their relationship, if there's not a non-permeable wall, that any touch between the state and the church means theocracy.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
like electrical shock.
Yeah, and
It's
it's like that is a a very ahistorical view that we got 2,000 years, and I was wide open to going with this person down the rabbit trail of when it went wrong. So I wasn't trying to defend any times when the church and state interrelationship was toxic and incestuous, but that it does not describe the whole ball of wax, right?
right.
That there was wild development of 2,000 years of, and going back to the question, Caesar versus God and the coin, whose responsibility? Going all the way back there, a wild development of, okay, so if the king asks me to do this, do I have to do that? And if the church tells me to do that, it's very complicated and nuanced, and it kind of blows apart the simplistic narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So where did you get this information?
Hmm.
Is probably
kind of a sub question of that.
a similar thing, and then
I did my own research.
yeah, and how did you come to this conclusion? This is different. It's not about where you got the information.
Right.
It was more about your story, right?
Yeah.
Like
Because
it's
we
like,
have very, arguably the smartest people in the world sitting in the same room in universities, and one of them's a string theorist,
mhm,
and the other one is, has a basic model of physics.
yeah,
They have the same data in front of them, and they reach different conclusions,
right,
right?
exactly,
Unless I've got that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
yeah, yeah,
We've got all this data, and we have to reach conclusions about it.
right, exactly.
How do you reach that
So
conclusion?
so let's say we finally agree on the data points.
Yeah. It's
But
like, here
data
it is.
points are to a theory what theological, like biblical content is to theology, right?
Yeah.
Each one of those, oh, that's a Bible verse, that's a Bible verse, that's a Bible verse. Well, putting them together is doing theology. In the same way that data points, putting them together is doing science.
Or data points are is a map, and having an assertion, a conclusion, is
Mhm.
actually arriving at a destination.
That's right. That's right. And we
Yeah.
could all agree on the same data points.
Yeah, it's like,
and
here's the map.
totally disagree on the conclusion, right?
Absolutely.
And I
Happens
think
all the time.
that's and that's probably where that's where some of the heat gets kind of can leave the conversation, right? It's like, well, we finally can agree on these data points. And it's like, oh, okay, whew. Well, so have you noticed that? And by the way, you do a lot of conflict resolution, as I do in counseling, and we practice the principle of agreement.
Find what you can agree on.
And why is that so important in conflict resolution, Dan?
Well, I think it values relationship over being right. What it means is that I value you as as another human being.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be connected to you. That's what we're made for. And ironically, it goes back to a Christian worldview. You
Yeah.
matter. You're made in the image of God. God loves you, and therefore
Yeah.
I love you.
Yeah.
You may annoy the daylights out of me right now,
Yeah.
but I love you. And so I'm going to do what I can without to maintain my attachment to you,
Mm-hmm.
an appropriate attachment, without violating my commitment to truth.
Yeah.
That attachment is absolutely. So I'm very motivated to find
What do we both see as the
what
truth
can we
here?
agree on.
What do we both see as the truth here?
Like
Yeah.
these days, like one of the things I find is we agree that this is creating suffering.
Mm.
Let's take transgenderism right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's some debate about what our response should be
Yeah.
to young people who are experiencing dysphoria or whatever's going on, and can we agree that this person is suffering right now?
Yeah.
And how do we respond to somebody who's suffering?
Yeah.
Do we shame them? Do we beat on them, or do we show compassion?
Yeah.
And we can agree on that, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
right.
We should let's agree on that.
Yep. Even if we have wildly different conclusions.
Even if we have different conclusions
on what that is.
Yeah.
So I think that the beauty of a question like that is it does kind of get to the narrative that lies behind why someone holds the position that they do. Like, you took those same data points, and I see what you did there. You put them together like this, and often sometimes through the lens of an experience
Sure.
or something like that.
Sure.
And sometimes that comes out when the question is asked, and you go, oh, well, I get it. And it's not to delegitimize it, but it nevertheless says you're viewing this through this lens.
Yeah.
And then
You know,
that can help.
art can be an example of this, and maybe when we're students would be an example. I don't know if they still do this. Do they have art classes anymore?
I don't know.
I don't know. We probably can't afford them. But but you give a group of students the exact same materials. Here's some popsicle sticks, some glue.
Yeah.
Johnny's going to eat his glue, whatever. You're whatever, and you got some glitter and whatever else. Same material, same data points, so whatever. And every kid's going to build something different with those same basic things. And you give somebody the same information, and so the artist runs those materials through their inner world,
That's
through
good.
their lens. How do they see things? How are they experiencing things? It's the same with information. Somebody who's had a bad church experience. I mean, I still, to this day, it's been 40 years since I had a life-changing bad church experience that drove me away from my faith. And when I get data points now, it's still, those lenses are still in place. It's like, stupid church people. And I'm one of them.
Yeah. You're leading them. Thanks.
I'm leading them now. And so it still colors the way I interpret data.
Yeah.
Because that's been my experience.
So
and yours has been different.
Yep. So that question can really expand our empathy. Okay, and then finally, Dan, two questions I'll take it at the same time. What if you're wrong? What if you're right? So I like it because it starts with the presumption that you're right, or at least the first question. For the sake of argument, you're right, and then let's play that out. And that to me is sometimes very helpful for somebody who. Let's say it's my assessment. This is going to sound arrogant, but let's say it's my assessment that they haven't really thought this one through. In other words, they haven't thought it through down the logical chain. Where does it lead? I think you got flawed premises, but let's leave that aside for a second.
Yeah.
Let's say you're right. Where does this take us? Where does this presumption about who Jesus is, or that Bible verse, or this particular moral issue, if we take this down the road, where do we leave that? And sometimes that can be a real eye opener. Like, well then. XYZ, and sometimes as it's coming out of their mouth, they go with a little smile and smirk, like, that probably isn't great, but
yeah,
but I'm going with it.
Right? Yeah, I'm going to double down on this.
Yeah,
that is, I think, What is the logical predicted outcome of this?
Yes.
Or what are the likely outcomes?
Yeah. To take a particularly controversial issue, but I think it illustrates when marriage was on it's almost become settled law now, but when the definition of marriage was such a big thing, I remember that was a question that I asked in good faith for some people, which is, if we remove the heterosexual dimension of marriage, do you think that all this does is just open up marriage to all the loving gay couples out there? If once we've lifted a certain biological uh, envelope around what we might call natural marriage, which the Christian religion affirms, do you think that does it end there? And I don't think some of the people that I dealt with had really thought about that. Well, of course, like and even the Supreme Court, when they actually ruled in Oberfeld in 15, talked about two, as if two in the marriage formula was inviolable.
Yeah,
But
right.
the gender part was totally morphable, but
Yeah.
the number two was the inviolable part that comes from God. They
Y-
didn't
yeah, I
say
mean,
it, but
it
it was as if it was just to be presumed
without comment.
without comment or
Yeah.
question. Two, duh, but the gender is fluid. The gender dynamic is non-determinative. It was like, well, there's 30,000 polygamous couples in Utah currently just wondering how this case is going to unfold because they don't think the two is an inviolable part of the marriage formula at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I guess, just an illustration of the whole, what if you're right? And then
Mm-hmm.
where does it go?
Yeah.
And then similarly, the opposite side, right? What if you're wrong?
Yeah. That I think both of those have a weakness, if you will. Not that they shouldn't be asked,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's interesting that he put them as the last of the 6
Mhm.
questions, because maybe, I don't know if he meant this, but I take it this way. You've got to have a level of trust with your interlocutor,
Mm-hmm.
the person you're questioning. There's got to be a level of trust to get to that,
Yeah.
because there's a legitimate weakness in it, which is you're deploying the slippery slope argument.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, if you're right about this, then it's going to, before you know it, cats and dogs are going to be living together, and it's going to be craziness. What are we going to do? It's and the slippery slope argument is open to legitimate criticism.
Sure.
But phrased this way, I think it reduces the aggressiveness of it.
Yeah.
And I think if it's towards the end of a conversation,
Yeah.
it's okay, all right, great, we got this. Here's where we agree. I mean,
Yeah.
you can almost see populating 2 lists through
Mhm.
this. And if we're looking for the things we agree on,
Yeah.
great, we've got this. Here are the 3 things that we don't see eye to eye on. Now let's play a game together.
Right.
You can almost gamify it. It's like,
Right.
what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong?
Yeah.
What if, if there is no, if we get it down to the question of origins, okay, what if you're wrong and there is a relational God behind the universe, and
Yeah.
you've asserted that there is none, and he wants it's a fiction. What if you're wrong?
Yeah.
What is the outcome?
What are the outcome? What are the consequences?
What are the
for belief for you? What
For
if
the
it's
w-
what if it's pervasively?
Yeah. What if
people
you
take
convince
your
everybody and you're
convince
wrong?
everybody your position? Yeah.
Yeah.
What happens?
And then be open to it. What if I'm wrong?
Yep. Exactly.
Great. If you can, it's easy to find, I think, on the internet. It's Penn Teller,
Yes.
magician, showman, and committed atheist. He tells a story about being evangelized by a guy, and he talks about, I know there's no God, but the way this guy approached him just was so winsome.
Yeah.
And he even, kind of confessed. He goes, "Look, this guy's convinced that he's right."
Yeah.
And if he's convinced that he's right, I'm headed for eternal hell. And he at least made an effort to try to get my attention.
And he's acting consistently with that
With
value
that-
system,
with that-
which I respect.
I respect that, and
Yeah.
and he showed some care
Yeah.
for me.
He said,
So-
"How much do you have to hate me?"
Yeah, what do you
love
say?
that line.
If
He
you
said,
if
"How much
he
do you
goes
have
he
to
goes
hate me?"
he goes, if you're standing and you see a dump truck heading for somebody and they're going to be hit, how much do you have to hate them not to try to get them out of the way?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a place for this,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to these more eternal, significant
Yeah.
questions. To say, what if you're wrong?
Yeah.
What if you're right? Those are really good questions. But I don't think I don't think those things start the conversation. Would be
Right.
my
Sure. And
given
maybe
that
that's why he had some last. You've gotten a lot of you covered a lot of territory by the time you get to here.
we say in conflict resolution, you have passport with this person
There you
now,
go. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're trusted.
And so AC3, I think that may be a great way to end this thing, to realize that one of our jobs, I think, as we are called to love our neighbor as ourselves and to love our enemies, and that would include our intellectual enemies, where we are not on the same sheet when it comes to worldview presumptions about God, about ultimate truth, about morality, that we are nevertheless called to love our people and to gain passport, and that is how we gain passport, right? Is that we just love our neighbor. And sometimes the best way to love is to be curious. And the best way to establish curiosity is to question. So let's let that be tools as we go about our work of being salt and light in the world.
I'm curious, Rick.
What are you curious about? You have
I don't
much
know.
curiosity?
I was trying to be clever.
I'm curious about how much weight your hair had last week versus now. 3
I don't
pounds?
know.
4? 10? I just don't know. I'd like to have it put on a scale. How do
I
we
would
know that?
too.
How do you know it's 3 pounds? Well, I
What
put it on a scale, Dan.
I have evidence. I have.
How
I
did
have
you come to that conclusion?
I assert that it did not weigh 3 pounds, based on my extensive evidence of holding piles of hair,
Oh, very good.
which is not.
See, now you see how it works.
Look at that.